Greetings, everyone. My name is Sarah Maddox-Ciesielski, and I'm in my final semester of earning a master's in criminal justice here at the University of Southern Indiana. Prior to this, I obtained a bachelor's degree in criminal justice, followed by a bachelor's in elementary education. For the past 8 years, I have worked as an educator, with the last 6 years dedicated to teaching sixth grade English language arts and reading in a public Title I school. This designation means that my school receives federal funding to support students from low-income backgrounds. In 2023, nearly a quarter of the students in my district came from households below the poverty line. While public education in the United States faces significant challenges, there is another sector where the educational system is failing at an even greater rate: juvenile correctional facilities. In these institutions, incarcerated youth have an abundance of time that could be utilized to provide them with an education that can fundamentally alter their futures. Education is one of the most critical factors in reducing recidivism. However, the reality is that educational opportunities within juvenile correctional facilities are often subpar, failing to make the effective use of time to produce the best possible outcomes for these youth. Illiteracy and lack of education are among the primary risk factors that contribute to an individual's involvement in the criminal justice system. Furthermore, they are some of the strongest predictors of whether an individual will reoffend after release. Addressing these issues presents an opportunity for meaningful change. By equipping incarcerated youth with essential literacy and academic skills, we can provide them with the tools they need to successfully reintegrate into society, ultimately benefiting both the individuals and the broader community. However, the education in juvenile correctional facilities to be truly effective, it must both be standardized and of high quality. Currently, in the juvenile justice population in the United States, approximately 85% of incarcerated youth are functionally illiterate. This is a staggering statistic, highlighting the urgent need for reform. Throughout my studies in the criminal justice program, I have focused on juvenile justice, seeking to understand the systemic failures that contribute to these educational disparities. Today, I will present my research proposal, which examines the stark inequalities between the educational opportunities available in juvenile correctional facilities and those provided in public schools. My findings reveal that the lack of standardized curriculum and quality instruction in these facilities is not only a disservice to incarcerated youth, but it also places a significant strain on the already overwhelmed criminal justice system. By addressing these disparities, we have the opportunity to enact meaningful change that will benefit both individuals and society as a whole. Proposing research to compare the differences in educational curriculum between juvenile correctional facilities and their public school counterparts, a review of the existing literature on the topic must be conducted. While there is a substantial amount of literature on the evolution of education in juvenile corrections, there's very little concerning specifics on what exactly is taught in these facilities and what methods and strategies are used. While there has been significant strides in incorporating an educational component in correction for juveniles, there is much criticism of that component. While educational opportunities in juvenile correctional facilities have evolved over time, they remain inconsistent and often inadequate compared to the public school counterparts. Standardization of any type of educational curriculum is all but absent and starkly inconsistent among facilities, not only across the country, but within individual states. This literature review looks at education in juvenile corrections from a historical perspective, at the impacts of legislation, at the inconsistencies in curriculum, and at the long term outcomes of education programs in juvenile corrections. Understanding these differences is vital in assessing the effectiveness of educational programs in juvenile correctional facilities. It also assists in seeing the potential impacts of educational programs on such things as rehabilitation and the rates of recidivism. Education plays an essential role in providing incarcerated juveniles with the knowledge and skills that they need to successfully reintegrate back into society. Unfortunately, disparities in such things as the quality of curriculum and instructional strategies and resources that are available can create substantial barriers to meeting these goals. Through an examination of the existing research, this literature review portion aims to highlight the gaps in access to education in juvenile corrections facilities and look at the equality of education to see where improvements can be made. In juvenile correctional settings dates back to the 1600s when the doctrine of parens patriae established the role of the state in overseeing the welfare of delinquent youth. Initially, educational instruction was limited to religious teachings and vocational training. During the Refuge and Reform era, education began to be viewed as a means of rehabilitation, yet the curriculum still only covered the basics, with a focus on morality and getting prepared to be a part of the workforce instead of academics. In the 1850s, the Ohio Reform School was the first institution to begin using a structured educational program, but even this was limited to an elementary level instruction. The recognition of educational rights for incarcerated juveniles gained momentum in the mid-20th century. In 1954, the Manual of Correctional Standards set guidelines for effective correctional education, but these were not universally implemented. Federal policies such as the Rehabilitation Act of 1973 and the Americans with Disabilities Act further emphasized equal educational rights for juveniles in correctional facilities. Despite these advancements, disparities in educational access and quality are still an issue to this day. The history of education in juvenile correctional facilities demonstrates a gradual, yet slow, shift from limited instruction that was focused on morality and obtaining job skills to the recognition of the right to education for juveniles who are incarcerated. Some reform efforts and policies have helped improve the state of education in juvenile correctional facilities, but disparities still exist. These ongoing disparities demonstrate that continued reform and implementation is necessary to make sure that every juvenile incarcerated has equal access to a quality education which meets their needs. Education has played a crucial role in shaping juvenile correctional education. The No Child Left Behind Act in 2001 made educational reform mandatory. This included guidelines for youth and juvenile corrections. The Every Student Succeeds Act in 2015 attempted to address challenges in tracking academic progress following release. However, research has shown that these policies were not effective in standardizing education in corrections, which led to inconsistencies in how education is delivered in different facilities. The Office of Correctional Education was established in 1991, and it was created to provide oversight into educational programs in juvenile correctional facilities, but oversight still is disorganized. It is argued that the lack of federal regulation and insufficient coordination between correctional institutions and educational agencies contribute to disparities. It is discussed that the accreditation process for correctional education programs, and it's highlighted that while standards exist, implementation varies widely among states and institutions. Multiple studies highlight the inconsistency of curriculum in juvenile correctional facilities. Research indicates that educational offerings differ based on such things as facility funding, administrative control, and state regulations. Some institutions focus on vocational training instead of core academic subjects, while other institutions do not employ certified teachers or have adequate essential resources. Educational outcomes for incarcerated youth in Florida were looked at, and it was found that even though they offered high school credits in corrections, academic achievement rates were still low. Incarcerated juveniles in correctional facilities, especially those with disabilities, struggled to have a sufficient grade point average, and many even failed to graduate. Additionally, the way that data is collected makes it hard to keep track of success in the long run in educational programs in juvenile correctional facilities. The inconsistencies of curriculum in juvenile correctional facilities poses many challenges to the academic success of incarcerated youth. The difference in such things as funding, administration, and the quality of instruction leave many incarcerated youth without the resources they need. Research highlights the struggles faced by these incarcerated juveniles to earn the credits that they need and to even eventually graduate. The methods used to collect data are also inconsistent, and that hinders the ability to assess what the long-term outcomes are. Reasons why a quality education for incarcerated youth is so important, and we will discuss that next. Despite all of its shortcomings, correctional education has been linked to positive post-release outcomes. Studies show that juveniles who participate in educational programs while incarcerated have reduced recidivism rates and increases the likelihood of successfully reintegrating into school. Juveniles who received structured education during incarceration were more likely to earn their diplomas and obtain employment after they're released. A qualitative study in which they interviewed former juvenile offenders in Pennsylvania found that educational support played an important role in rehabilitation. Many participants stated that educational programs that were structured helped them to stay motivated and made it easier to reintegrate into traditional schools or find employment after they were released. However, a lack of consistent curriculum and inadequate special education services continued to slow down any progress. The research points to correctional education having the ability to increase post-release outcomes. Studies that have been conducted indicate that having a structured educational program can make school reintegration more successful, reduce recidivism, and increase employment opportunities for juveniles who were once incarcerated. Overwhelmingly supports the need for standardized education in juvenile correctional facilities. Recommendations include federal oversight to ensure incarcerated youth are receiving equal education, improving data tracking for outcomes after release, and increasing funding for obtaining and keeping certified teachers. Additionally, it is suggested that schools and juvenile facilities should be held to the same standards as public schools. They should have the same access to rigorous coursework and include credit recovery programs. While it is true that juvenile correctional education has seen progress, significant inequities still remain. A federally mandated and standardized curriculum and stronger accountability is necessary to make sure that all incarcerated youth receive a quality education. As research into this subject continues, policymakers and legislators must try to address these inequities so that educational opportunities for juvenile offenders may be improved. I propose will examine the similarities and differences between the education curriculum taught to incarcerated youth and those who are not incarcerated. The research will be conducted on educational staff in juvenile corrections facilities in Indiana and educational staff in public schools in the same demographic area. When looking at the literature on this area, there's plenty of information that describes the evolution and implementation of education into juvenile corrections. However, not much research has been done that addresses specifically what curriculum is followed in juvenile correctional facilities and what strategies are used to educate incarcerated youth. The goal of this research is to compare the curriculum in juvenile correctional facilities with the curriculum in public schools. The purpose of the research is to determine if incarcerated youth are afforded the same education as other youth who are not incarcerated. Educational staff in both the juvenile correctional facilities and the public schools should be interviewed, where they will be asked what curriculum is used to teach the core subjects of math and reading. The interview will also include questions regarding strategies they use to teach that curriculum. Proposal, you'll see that the methodology utilizes a qualitative approach, ensuring a robust analysis of educational disparities while emphasizing the importance of stakeholder engagement throughout the research process. You will also see a strategic data collection plan, which includes a detailed timeline outlines phases of planning, data collection, analysis, and dissemination, facilitating systemic progress and ensuring that findings are effectively communicated to relative audiences. How does the educational curriculum taught to incarcerated juveniles compare with those who are not incarcerated? Specific findings will include the origin of the curriculum used in each institution and strategies used to teach the curriculum. Since there is no prior research that specifically answers the research question, the questions in this study will be at a very basic level. The implementation of education and corrections has been discussed, but no specific data on what the curriculum is or the origin of the curriculum has been studied. This study will be conducted using purposive sampling. The research subjects will be specifically chosen because they have certain knowledge that will assist in answering the research question. One educator will be interviewed from each of the 6 institutions, 3 public schools, and 3 juvenile correctional facilities in Indiana. The subjects will be intentionally selected and will be able to provide the most informed and relevant responses to the interview questions. The sampling frame is all educators in each institution. From the selection of educators in each institution, one will be chosen by that institution's administration with the criteria that the individual is one that has had the most experience teaching at the institution and is knowledgeable of the curriculum and strategies utilized to educate the students. The goal is to make sure that the selected educators have direct experience and insight into the educational practices and challenges within their institutions. This will ensure that all the data collected is relevant and meaningful. The subjects that will be surveyed will be from 3 juvenile correctional facilities in Indiana and 3 public school systems in the same areas. The author will seek to gain access to emails and phone numbers of one educator in each of these 6 facilities for the completion of this proposal. The author will send emails that present an overview of the research prior to the interviews. Included in that email will also be an informed consent page that informs the subject that the study will be looking at educational curriculum and strategies taught. It will also inform the subject that all answers are confidential and provide contact information for the research. The study will be a comparative research study that focuses on understanding the similarities and differences between the educational curriculum used for incarcerated juveniles who are housed in juvenile correctional facilities and those used in public schools for non-incarcerated juveniles. This study will use qualitative data. Interviews will be examined to answer the research question. The units of analysis will be individuals. The study will examine teachers, the curriculum they follow, what instructional strategies are used to teach that curriculum, and how things such as standardized testing and graduation rates compare with their public school counterparts. The general timeline of this study will be structured, allowing adequate time for each stage. The total timeline will be approximately 9 months. The planning and preparation stage will take place over the course of 2 months and include finalization of the research proposal, seeking and gaining approval for the study, and initial contact with the institutions and subjects. The second stage will also take approximately 1 month to complete. In this stage, initial emails will be sent out to the research subjects, which explain the study and gain their consent to participate. Interviews will also be scheduled during this stage. The third stage will consist of data collection and will take approximately 2 months, which considers possible longer periods based on subject availability and the possible need for a follow-up. Interviews will be conducted, and the researcher will ensure that they have all the data necessary for analysis, scheduling follow-up interviews as necessary. Interviews will be transcribed during this stage as well. The next stage of the study will be data analysis and will take approximately 1 month. In this stage, the researcher will examine the interview transcriptions to identify common themes and patterns, as well as differences between what curriculum is taught in the institutions and what strategies are used. The next stage involves writing the research report and will also take 1 month. The researcher will use this time to organize and analyze the report, review the findings of the study, and make corrections. The final stage of the study will take approximately 2 months to complete and will include proofreading the finalized report and submitting it for review. There may be adjustments in time made depending on factors such as availability of research subjects and the overall difficulty of transcribing, organizing, and analyzing the data found in the interviews. As far as budget, this will be conducted independently and no funding will be requested. All necessary resources, such as materials and time, will be provided by the author to ensure that the project is completed without any financial assistance. Research is so that the findings can be shared with institutions, stakeholders, and individuals who can improve educational programs in juvenile corrections, influence policies, and are able to advocate for standardization and availability of better resources in juvenile correctional facilities. The goals of dissemination are to inform policy changes which encourage or mandate standardization of education programs, to increase awareness about the disparities that exist between juvenile corrections and public schools, and to engage policymakers, educators, and correctional administrators with the goal of making real changes. The message to be disseminated should include the following. Juvenile correctional education is inconsistent and inadequate in comparison to public schools. There exists a lack of standardized curriculum and certified educators, which negatively affects the goals of rehabilitation and reintegration in incarcerated individuals, and that policy reforms, federal oversight, and more funding are essential to correct the issue of inequitable education for juveniles who are incarcerated. The audience that should be targeted to receive these messages include educational institutions, officials in the juvenile justice system, and legislators and policymakers. To share the research findings, there are methods that could be utilized. The research can be submitted to academic publications and peer-reviewed journals in the areas of criminal justice, education, and even social policy. The findings can even be presented at conferences that focus on reform in education and juvenile justice. To do so, a policy brief can be created which summarizes the findings of the study and includes specific recommendations for how the findings can be used to improve education in juvenile justice facilities. A report can be created that includes the data found and an analysis of the data to distribute. The media can be used to inform the public and get others involved in reforming education in juvenile justice as well. Articles can be published not only in newspapers, but also in other criminal justice and education media sources. By increasing public awareness of the findings, discussions can begin to take place about reforming education in these settings. Is to provide a comparison of the educational curriculum and teaching strategies used for juveniles incarcerated at correctional facilities versus juveniles in public schools. By examining the experiences and perspectives of educators in both types of institutions, this research can provide insight into disparities and/or similarities in the education provided. The findings from this study could assist in informing policies and general practices in both settings. This study can help to reach the goal of ensuring that all juveniles, regardless of their circumstances, have access to and are receiving a quality, equitable education. Addressing educational gaps in juvenile correctional facilities is essential for improving outcomes for incarcerated youth. This study hopes to provide valuable insights into how education in juvenile corrections can better serve juvenile offenders. Quality education is a key factor in promoting rehabilitation, giving incarcerated juveniles the skills needed for personal growth and future success. A structured educational program can also help ease the transition back into public education and into society, which will in return reduce recidivism rates. By drawing attention to what teaching strategies are effective and what needs improvement, this research can help add to developing educational programs that are more consistent and extensive. In the end, investing in education programs in juvenile correctional facilities not only benefits the juveniles who are incarcerated, but also the community by supporting long-term outcomes. Education should be an equal right for all youth, regardless of their circumstances. By recognizing the current shortcomings in juvenile correctional education and taking action to implement necessary reforms, we can create a system that truly supports the rehabilitation and future success of incarcerated youth. Thank you for your time, and I welcome any questions you may have at semaddoxci@eagles.usi.edu. Thank you.